Yo guys, how's it going? Welcome back to the Geeky Gangster. In today's video we're going to be talking about Texas becoming an independent nation. Rather, I believe they have the right to do so, and just laying down the straight facts about it. And yeah guys, let's get right into the video. So when you're talking about if Texas has the right to become an independent nation, and if you believe that it has the right to do so, I think it's best to look at countries that are around the size of Texas. So the biggest thing is probably going to be comparing Texas to Ukraine, because the vast majority of Americans on both sides of the political aisle would say that Ukraine has the right to be an independent country, and they think that Russia is evil for trying to attack a smaller country. And you know, we've seen all these American companies pulling out of Russia, but then when Texas says that they want to be an independent country, all of a sudden the vast majority of Americans are actually against that. But let's look at some statistics comparing Ukraine to Texas. So Ukraine does have a slightly larger population, 44 million people. Texas only has 28 million people, but Ukraine has a landmass of 233,000 square miles, while Texas has 268,000 square miles. So Texas is actually larger landmass wise than Ukraine is. And here's the really big kicker. Ukraine only has a GDP of $155 billion. Texas has a GDP of $1.9 trillion. So if you take a look at just the GDP, alright, if you times 2 by 5, you get to 10, and so if you times 2 by 5, you get to 10, and so if you times 200 by 5, you get to 1,000 billion, which is a trillion. So basically, Texas has more than 10 times as much money as Ukraine. Texas has more land than Ukraine, and with all that money that Texas does have, they have less people to take care of than Ukraine. So if Texas did become an independent country, first of all, it would be very successful. They have significant amounts of money in Texas. So if you take that GDP with the population, it would be the most successful country on earth. No other country in Europe has that much money compared to the population size. It's absolutely insane. You know, I'm just looking at these other countries next to Ukraine. Romania has 50 billion for all their people. Russia has 1.5 trillion for 100 million. Let's look at UK's GDP real quick, actually. So the UK does have a $2.7 trillion, but you have to look at the UK's population as well. So they have 2.7 trillion for 67 million people, so they are still significantly poorer than Texas. So when you make a statement like that, like the UK is more poor than Texas, if Texas would be a country, like that's how absolutely wealthy Texas is. It would completely dominate the rest of the world, you know, Europe-wise. It might be slightly worse than the Union, but here's, you know, let's look at Australia as well, because Australia is a good population comparison. So, Australia population and Australia GDP. So yeah, Australia's not doing too bad. They have 1.3 trillion for 25 million people, and Texas has 1.9 trillion for 28 million. So Australia has the exact same population as Texas, with nearly half of the GDP. So, Australia is poor compared to Texas. The UK is poor compared to Texas. So it's absurdly wealthy, and with a huge landmass as well. Let's look up Australia landmass real quick. So Australia does have a bigger landmass than Texas, but so much of Australia is not populated at all. I forgot about that. But still, so we already, you should have made your decision based off of that, because going back to the Ukraine war, you are absolutely hypocritical if you say that Ukraine has the right to be an independent country, but Texas doesn't, because there's absolutely no difference. And, a lot of Americans would say, well, America won't be as powerful as a country if Texas left. And yeah, that's exactly the exact same thing that Russia is saying. And you have people on the left that say, oh, Texans are evil because I disagree with their politics. Yeah, that's the exact same thing that Russia is saying. And so if you think that Russia has the right to be, if you think that Ukraine has the right to be independent and Texas doesn't, you're hypocritical. It's just as simple as that. And by the way, that's vice versa. If you think that Texas has the right to be an independent country, but Ukraine doesn't, then you are also hypocritical. But now let's look at the consequences. If Texas left the Union, that would be absolutely beyond devastating for the United States of America, because just first of all, right off the bat, electorally, Texas, I believe, holds, I think it's either 35 or 38 electoral votes, and they're constantly rapidly growing in population. So by 2024, they're probably going to hold about 41 to 42, 43 electoral votes, which means it would be very difficult for Republicans to ever win on a national level without Texas, let alone all of the representatives the House of Representatives that come from Texas. So it would be very difficult for Republicans to hold House majority. And so basically what you're looking at is if Texas ever left the United States would instantly become a dictatorship, because the Democrats would no longer have to work with the Republicans if Texas left the United States. And so that is very, very dangerous. Even if you ideologically agree with the Democratic Party, you would still be living under a dictatorship that would have absolutely no interest in working with the other side. And when that happens, you do see the more dangerous ideologies start to rise up very, very quickly. So within about 10 years, you would be living under a communist dictatorship, and the United States of America would have fallen at that point. Guns would definitely be illegal. Just completely leftist, USSR style communist dictatorship. Very dangerous, very poor nation. Crime would be rampant throughout the entire country. If you look at cities like Seattle, Portland, and the south side of Chicago, where crime is rampant and you have all these gangs, pop, pop, shooting each other for wearing the wrong color hoodies, and if you go to Seattle and Portland, everyone walks around like zombies. They can't hardly stand up straight because every single person in that city is on methamphetamines, because all drugs are legal there. And we will have soft on crime policies all around America. The national government will not step in any single city. And so even in the smaller towns, you're going to see people walking around like zombies with needles with needles sticking out of their arm, because the police will simply not be allowed to do anything in this country if Texas leaves, because it will be a communist dictator with soft on crime policies. And so it's just really horrible. If you talk about inflation, you're not going to be able to afford a loaf of bread within 10 years if Texas leaves this nation. It will be absolutely devastating. The United States of America will not exist in the same way you know it today if Texas leaves this country. And so it's very hard to even explain how devastating it would be, because, you know, I just mentioned the big stuff, like you're not going to be able to afford food, people are going to walk around like zombies in your city, nowhere is going to be safe in this country, you're going to be living under a communist dictatorship. But that's just the big stuff. If you go to the really, like, small stuff, well, you're also not going to be having free speech anymore. If you say something offensive on the internet, you will be arrested for it. I hope you know that. Just like in some of these European countries where it's already happening. And leftists say that they want people to be arrested, like, if they use the N-word or something. But it's going to go so far beyond that. Like, if you make fun of the government, if you make fun of, like, Joe Biden's government under a communist dictatorship, you will be brought to prison for that. It's, like I'm telling you, the Constitution's going to die, first and foremost. So if Texas leaves this union, we will not have a union anymore. Just because of how the Electoral College is set up. Like, we cannot win without Texas, so it's just beyond devastation. And there will be no saving it, because even if we got to a point where Republicans were electable, it would be so far gone. But just because it would be devastating for the Union, like Ukraine being an independent country is pretty devastating for Russia. And especially if Ukraine joined NATO and the United States had missiles right on the Russian border, pointed at Moscow at all times, that's pretty bad for Russia. Like, losing Ukraine is absolutely horrible for Russia. Russia would be more wealthy, more powerful, they would have more people, more influence around the world if Ukraine was a part of Russia. But that doesn't mean that Ukraine doesn't have the right to be an independent nation, just because it's going to hurt another nation. And so going back to that, Texas absolutely has the right to be its own country, because they're insanely wealthy. They're way more wealthy than Australia, way more wealthy than the UK. They have a huge land mass, an absolutely insane land mass. And they have a solid, 22 million people and rapidly growing population. Also, they have the most Fortune 500 companies in the US, and so they have every single right to be their own country. That's just the end of the argument right there. But it would be beyond devastating for the free world. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you guys did, please hit the like button down below. Make sure you subscribe. I'm really trying to get to 100 subscribers, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.